The snow fell silent and heavy as dust draped the Montana woods in a curtain of pale violet. 5 riders tore through the pines like frightened beasts, their coats slick with sweat despite the cold. Their horses, spooked and panting, struggled to stay upright in the drifting snow. Clayton Briggs didn't look back. He didn't need to. He could hear the blood trail they left behind, Elias gasping behind him, Jeb cursing, Meto's saddle creaking under his bulk. They were ghosts now, shadows fleeing a town where the sheriff had pulled faster than anyone expected, and the banker's daughter had fought back harder than they'd planned. Clayton raised a hand, and the gang slowed to a stop near a frozen stream. "There," he grunted, pointing toward the dark outline of a cabin perched against a ridge. Smoke curled from its crooked chimney, thin and almost reluctant, as if trying not to be noticed. "Looks empty," Jeb muttered, already sliding off his horse. His face was bloodied, one eye swollen shut. "Or looks like a damn trap," Meto grunted, always the skeptic, always half right. "Trap or not," Elias wheezed, clutching his side. "I'm freezing. I'm bleeding. I'm going in." Clayton's eyes lingered on the cabin. No fresh tracks. No lantern light. But the snow around the porch had been disturbed and covered back over, like someone trying to hide the fact they'd ever left. He pulled his revolver from its holster. "Fine," he said. "But keep your eyes open." The door creaked open to reveal a room caught mid-breath. The fire in the hearth still glowed with heat. A pot of rabbit stew bubbled gently, the scent of thyme and meat thick in the air. On the table, 5 pewter bowls were stacked, clean and dry. A rifle leaned against the far wall. A pair of worn boots sat by the hearth. No one was there. Jeb grinned. "Son of a, someone's living good out here." Clayton didn't lower his gun. His boots echoed softly on the wood as he stepped further inside, scanning every corner, every shadow. The back door was bolted. The single bedroom was empty. No cellar. No upstairs. Just walls of pine and a silence so thick it seemed to press against their ears. Elias collapsed near the fire, pulling off his gloves. His fingers were blue. Who leaves stew cooking and just vanishes? "Someone who meant to be back," Clayton muttered. He scanned a wall above the hearth. A few antlers nailed up like a crown. A pelt of gray wool hung like a curtain. Meto found a half-empty flask on a shelf and uncorked it. The smell of whiskey filled the air. Maybe the man's dead. Snowstorm got him. Could have been out hunting. Then where's his rifle? Clayton snapped. And why is the fire still alive? The wind howled outside, bending the trees like old spines. Jeb leaned back in a rocking chair near the hearth, grunting in satisfaction as it creaked beneath him. The warmth made their bodies ache. The scent of stew pulled at their hunger like claws. For a moment, it felt like shelter. Like luck. Then the chair snapped. Jeb yelped as it collapsed beneath him with a dry crack. His arm scraped the edge of the hearth. Blood spattered onto the rug. But that wasn't what made Clayton freeze. A dull metallic click echoed beneath the floorboards. What the hell was that? Elias sat up. Clayton turned slowly toward the sound. Jeb cursed, pushing himself up, but no one moved to help him. The rug near the fireplace shifted, not from wind, not from them, as if something below it had breathed. Then came a groan of wood. A hidden seam opened, revealing a square outline in the floor. A trapdoor. A moment later, it lifted. They all backed away instinctively, guns drawn, though no one stood behind it. Inside the trapdoor was darkness, and bones. Human bones. Piled neatly. Clean. Arranged like offerings. Skulls grinning up at them from the earth. And at the very top of the pile, resting like a warning, was a hand-carved trap trigger, stained, freshly oiled. Clayton's voice was low and tight. "We're not alone." Meto backed toward the door, but Clayton snapped. "Don't run. That's what he wants." "Who?" Elias asked, voice thin. Clayton didn't answer. He crouched by the trapdoor, scanning the inside. Among the bones was a boot, newer than the rest. Leather stitched with initials. He lifted it. "Army issue," he muttered. "Micah Voss." "Voss." Meto's brow furrowed. "I know that name. Civil War scout. Vanished. Folks say he lost his mind after a raid. Turned wild. Lives off meat in memory." Elias looked toward the windows. "Then this is his cabin." Clayton nodded once. "And we just broke into it." Jeb, still nursing his bruises, laughed bitterly. "We've robbed banks, trains, and ranches. You think one ghost's gonna scare us? Clayton didn't smile. This ain't a ghost, Jeb. It's worse. This is a mun who turned his rage into traps. A mun who lives by waiting. Something thunked against the wall outside. Everyone froze. Another sound, soft, rhythmic, like claws against wood. Or knives. Meto darted to the window. Nothing but trees. Snow. Shadows. Could be an animal, he said. But his voice betrayed his doubt. Clayton holstered his pistol and grabbed the rifle from a wall. He opened the bolt and checked it. Loaded. Oiled. Ready. This was left for us, he whispered. Elias looked around the cabin, his face paling. Why would he set a stew? Why would he light the fire? Because he knew someone would come, Clayton said. Someone desperate. Someone cold. He knew we'd come in. He knew we'd settle down. And then, a knock. Not on the door, from the roof. Then a scuffle. Something walking above them. Clayton's gaze darted upward. The ceiling creaked. Everyone pointed their guns upward, but no sound followed. The fire crackled, innocently unaware. Jeb exhaled. He's just one man. A voice cut through the wood. Low, patient, coming from everywhere. 5 came through the pines before. Only Bones walked back. Elias spun. Where? The voice again, quieter now. I remember the sound your boots made. It's the same sound wolves make when they run from thunder. Clayton backed toward the door. He's playing games. Meto pulled the bolt on his rifle. Then let's play harder. Outside, the snow began to fall heavier. The light dimmed further. The windows frosted over. The trapdoor slammed shut on its own. And then, from somewhere deep beneath the floor, they heard another sound. Metal dragging against metal. Resetting. Preparing. Elias whispered. He's not just hunting us. He's collecting. The wind howled through the pine trees like a chorus of lost souls, and the fire inside the cabin had begun to burn lower, casting long, twitching shadows on the log walls. No one slept that first night. Not really. They took turns sitting watch, though none admitted to being afraid. But their eyes never stopped moving. Every creak in the wood, every moan of the wind, felt like a step closer to something they couldn't name. By morning, the stew pot was empty, but none of them had touched it. They'd let it boil too long, and it had burned to black sludge. The air inside the cabin now carried the acrid tang of charred meat, like something had died in the hearth. Jeb grumbled about it while nursing his arm, but even he had stopped joking. Elias stood near the wall, squinting at something carved deep into the timber, just above the window frame. He rubbed away soot with the edge of his sleeve and read the names aloud. Isaiah Finch. Lester Creel. Roan Dagger, his voice thinned. All dated. Years apart. Meto looked up from where he was cleaning his knife. So they're all dead. These names, they match bounty posters I seen. Finch was a stagecoach thief. Creel killed 2 marshals. Dagger vanished in Wyoming. He turned to Clayton. These aren't just names. They're trophies. Clayton stared at the carvings for a long time. Then we're not the first to walk through this door. And we sure as hell won't be the last. Something had shifted in the air overnight. It was colder, tighter. The walls seemed closer than before. The boots by the hearth were gone. So was the rifle that had leaned beside the door. Clayton noticed it first. We didn't move it, he said. No one spoke. Jeb, he asked. I didn't touch it, Jeb said quickly, rising to his feet. Why would I? I got my own iron. Clayton walked slowly to the hearth and bent down. The floorboards creaked beneath him, and his hand traced the edge of the wall where a faint smudge of dirt was now missing. Someone had come inside while they slept, and taken the weapon. The door had never opened. You're telling me someone walked in here, took a rifle, and left, while we were sitting 6 feet away? Meto asked, voice low and disbelieving. Elias moved toward the window. No tracks in the snow, he whispered. He was right. The snow outside was pristine. Not a footprint to be seen. But something was off. The firewood stack was shorter than the night before. I ain't staying here, Jeb muttered, gripping his revolver tighter. We need to get back on the trail. Find a town. Any town. Clayton didn't answer. He was staring at the carved names again. He remembered now. Micah Voss. Scout for General Sheridan. Fought at Shiloh and Chickamauga. Took to wilderness after a Confederate raid killed his wife and children in their home. Word was, he'd set out west with nothing but his uniform, a hunting knife, and a Bible missing half its pages. Vanished near Hollow Ridge, they said. Locals stopped going north of the ridge after cattle started disappearing and hunters failed to return. He hunts what hunts him. That was the whisper in saloons from Helena to Red Lodge. By sundown, the tension in the cabin was a coiled spring. No one spoke unless they had to. Even the firewood crackled quieter, as if afraid to draw attention. Clayton moved in silence, counting their weapons, then recounting. 2 bullets were missing. 1 revolver had been emptied and laid back in its holster, like a dead bird returned to the nest. I cleaned my piece, Meto said. Didn't fire it. Neither did I, said Jeb. Clayton looked at Elias. The young man shook his head slowly. Then who fired them? It was Elias who found the rope. He was out behind a cabin, trying to relieve himself near the tree-line, when his boot hit something taut beneath the snow. He yelped and staggered back, drawing his pistol, but it was too late. A mechanism triggered. From the trees, a length of rope snapped free, dragging something heavy up into the branches with a brutal, jerking speed. A body. Screaming. The sound was wet, guttural. A shriek that rose to a pitch of agony before cutting off like a candle snuffed. Elias ran back to the cabin, breath ragged. He took one. He took one of us. Clayton didn't wait. He grabbed a lantern, pushed through the door, and charged out into the woods with Meto behind him. The wind whipped up, stealing warmth from their skin as they approached the trees. Then they saw it. Jeb, hanging upside down from a pine branch, legs bound with wire, his face battered, eyes wide with terror. Blood dripped from his scalp, from his nose, from his mouth. But he was alive. Barely. Clayton raised the lantern. The bark around the trunk was clawed and scarred, not by animals, but blades. There were etchings above Jeb's head, markings not of letters but of direction. A signal. A message. Voss had left this man alive, on purpose. He wanted them to see him. He wanted them to understand. They cut Jeb down carefully, but he was incoherent. He whimpered when they touched him, mumbling about eyes in the trees, about a men who didn't breathe, only stared. They carried him inside. Later that night, as Jeb lay muttering beneath a blanket, Elias whispered, "This ain't no cabin. It's a cage. And we just walked in like rabbits." No one argued. And outside, just beyond the ring of light from the cabin windows, something breathed in unison with the wind. A presence. Waiting. Always waiting. The snow came down harder the next morning, smothering the world in silence so complete it pressed on their ears. Clayton was the first to rise, the weight of dread heavy on his shoulders. Jeb lay near the fire, his breath shallow and ragged, his eyes half-closed. Elias tried to tend him, but the boy's hands shook as if the fever had passed into his own blood. Meto sat sharpening his knife again and again, the rasping scrape of steel against stone gnawing at everyone's nerves. Clayton knew the cabin was a coffin. If they stayed, the hunter would bleed them slowly. If they left, maybe they had a chance. He said as much, and Meto agreed with a grunt. Elias looked as though he wanted to argue, but his lips were blue and his carriage had frozen somewhere in the night. They saddled what horses remained and stepped into the storm. The forest was a maze of white and black, each tree a skeletal finger clawing at the sky. Clayton led, rifle slung tight, eyes on every drift and hollow. He knew traps. He'd said enough in his time. But this man, this ghost, laid snares like an artist painted. The first came without warning. A crow cawed from the treetops, wings slicing the snow-thick air. It swooped low and dropped something at Elias' feet. A boot. His boot. The leather split, the inside soaked crimson. Elias stared at it as if it were an omen, his face draining of color. "That's mine," he whispered. I had it on last night." He staggered back, clutching his foot. But the foot was still there. The boot was a twin. A warning. A demonstration. Clayton grabbed him by the collar. "Keep your wits or you're next." They pressed on, tension coiled in every step. Meto laughed bitterly, muttering that no one man could herd wolves like this. But the laugh cut short when Jeb stumbled. He screamed, a sound ripped from the belly, as metal teeth clamped down on his hand. Snow exploded red. A bear trap lay hidden under pine needles, sprung shut like the jaws of hell. Jeb thrashed, his voice breaking, pleading for help. Clayton and Meto pulled at the iron teeth, but the trap was set deep and vicious. When it finally came free, Jeb's hand was ruined, fingers gone, the bone split like kindling. His howls echoed through the valley. the sound of triumph for the mun in the trees. Meto swore and shoved snow against the wound while Elias wept openly. "We can't fight him," the boy cried. "He's not a mun. He's the devil. We should give up, lay down our guns, beg for mercy." Clayton struck him hard across the mouth. Elias fell back, clutching his lip. "You beg," Clayton growled. "You beg and you die. I don't bow to ghosts, and I sure as hell don't bow to hunters." But his eyes betrayed something colder, a shadow of fear he couldn't hide. As night fell, they dragged Jeb back to the cabin. The air inside was thick, suffocating, as if the logs themselves were closing in. Elias, still shaken, wandered toward the shelf near the bed. His fingers brushed a leather-bound book, dust-caked yet strangely cared for. He opened it. The writing was precise, soldierly. Notes on terrain, weather, animal migrations. But between them were names, dates, accounts of kills. Men, not beasts. Each entry colder than the last. The Journal of Micah Voss. Elias read in a trembling voice. Sergeant of Scouts, Union Army, commended for bravery at Shiloh. Family slain in raid, 1867. Vowed vengeance. He turned the page. Claimed Wolf Hollow for his own. Declared it his battlefield, his hunting ground. The boy lifted his eyes, wide with realization. He isn't dead. He's right here. 20 years, and he's been turning this land into a web. Meto cursed and hurled the knife he'd been sharpening into the wall. Jeb groaned in fever delirium. Clayton sat by the fire, polishing his revolver with deliberate calm. But his mind roiled. He remembered the war. Men like Voss had always been different, their eyes too sharp, their patience endless. Voss had simply never returned from the battlefield. Outside, snow hissed against the window like sand. The forest pressed closer with every gust. Elias peered out, and his breath hitched. Yellow eyes. At first he thought they belonged to a wolf. But wolves don't stand upright. Wolves don't burn with human rage. The figure was there, a silhouette between the trees, unmoving, watching. He blinked and it was gone. "They'll kill us all," Elias whispered. Clayton rose, revolver in hand. "Not if I kill him first." He pushed past the others and stormed out into the snow, lantern in one hand, pistol in the other. His boots crunched over hidden snares, over branches that might conceal arrows, pits, spikes. He spun at every shadow, snarled at every sound. The storm clawed at his eyes, the cold biting through his coat. Then, movement. He raised the gun, finger on the trigger. But the hammer stuck. A dull click echoed, sharp as thunder in the silence. His breath caught in his throat, and from the darkness, a voice whispered close enough to frost his ear. That click was the last thing you'll hear. Night crackled with a brutal quiet, the kind that makes a man listen to his own heartbeat and wonder if it's loud enough to give him away. The storm had paused as if to watch. The trees stood stiff and black against a sky thin to milk. Somewhere above the ridge, the moon bled through a veil of cloud. A dim red coin balanced on a ghostly fingertip. Clayton stood in it with his jaw locked, breath pluming, pistol stubborn in his seized hand as if the metal itself had decided it was done killing. A voice drifted between trunks and snowdrifts, so close it brushed the edge of human warmth. "Men like you stole my peace," it said, as calm as a man reciting scripture. "I take it back, inch by inch." Clayton turned slowly, raising the lamp. "Show yourself, soldier," he said, hating the tremor he heard. "Or are you nothing but a whisper with boots?" The whisper did not flinch. "Boots wore down to leather and bone a long time ago. I traded them for patience." Meto crashed out of the dark behind him, hauling a length of rope, eyes glittering with a mean hope. "We'll trade your patience for blood," he snarled. "I'll gut him, Clay. I swear it." Clayton cut the rope from Meto's hands with a single swipe. "You'll do nothing loud unless it's the last sound you ever make. We move slow and smart. We move as if every twig has teeth." They moved anyway, because pride will move a mun when sense will not. Elias stumbled after them, sleeve knotted around his bitten lip, the boy's face chalk pale. He looked back at the cabin, where Jeb lay shivering by a dying fire, a blanket dark with blood bundled around his ruined wrist. Elias wanted to stay. He wanted to run. He wanted to be 10 again in some other life where a warm kitchen had been the worst kind of trap he knew. The forest narrowed, funneling them along a slight, deceitful depression. No tracks but their own. No birdsong. The air thinned as they climbed until it felt like the world had been scraped clean of everything but their fear and the sound of their boots. Then the ground disappeared. Meto vanished with a strangled shout. The snow slumped inward like a lung caving, and the path became a mouth. Clayton lunged, caught a sleeve, and felt it tear at his hands. He heard Meto strike once, twice, and a shattering crack like old wood. He threw himself flat, lantern thrust toward the hole, and the light fell into blackness, and antlers. Dozens. A wreath of bone tipped with stained points, set upright in a pit, the heads of elk and deer shaved down to barbs. Meto lay impaled in the ribcage of a great bull's crown, impetuous heart punctured. His eyes still moved. His mouth formed words that wouldn't come. Clayton reached, but another voice spoke, gentle and exact. He tried to run, it said. He landed like all who run. You taught him to hurry, Briggs. I taught him to stop. Clayton's hands went rigid on the lantern handle. The hunter's face was nowhere. The hunter's presence was everywhere. Elias had fallen to his knees in the snow, hands clasped so tight his knuckles showed bone. Tears froze along his lashes. Please, he said, though he didn't know which god to address, only the one with traps in his winter. Snow sifted down into the pit like sifted flour on a grave. Meto's eyes found Elias. In them was confusion first, and then an animal grief. He coughed a wet, brief cough, and the pit accepted the rest of him. The lantern flame trembled. Clayton stood and did not look down again. He stared into the trees as if the trees had wronged him personally. What brand do your saddlebags carry? The voice asked from a higher limb, a lower drift, from the memory of a room that still smelled of stew. Clayton's head tilted, wary. The serpent with two tails, the voice continued for him, patient as frost. Forked into the hide. Stamped on your holsters. Cut into your spurs. You carried your banner like a badge you never earned. Elias flinched as if struck. He'd seen Clayton burn that mark into wood in Selena to frighten boys who didn't yet know to be frightened. I saw it before, the hunter said. The calm eroded into gravel, then steadied again. On men who rode through my home. They laughed in my daughter's room. They wore that snake when they broke my wife's throat. I kept a piece of the brand. I pressed it into wet pine and watched the smoke say a thing no court would say for me. A picture vertical and bright flashed behind Elias' eyes, a lamplit room, the crack of a door, the slither of leather, a man kneeling amid spilled dolls. He pressed fist to mouth. We didn't, he started and stopped, the light choking him as thoroughly as truth. You're the echo, the voice said. I hunt echoes until the mountain goes quiet. They returned to the cabin hollowed out, each step a subtraction. Jeb sat propped against the wall, fever-glazed, staring at his missing hand as if it might explain itself. Elias wrapped him tighter and murmured nothing words, like a mother calming a child who knows the house is burning. Clayton slammed the door and barred it twice, then kicked the trigger rug aside so hard it snagged on a nail and tore. He pried boards loose and fed the fire with an anger that wanted the whole place to blaze. It was the first time the hunter laughed, a soft, pitying sound from somewhere beyond the chimney, as if they had already given him what he needed. When the laugh faded, another noise replaced it, familiar, impossible. A woman's voice. Not speech so much as tone, the rise and fall of someone humming while she folded shirts or swayed a baby. It drifted in from just outside the window, a ribbon of tenderness slipping through the chinks. Jeb lifted his head. His face broke open in longing. Ma, he whispered. Clayton lunged for him, but grief makes men fast. Jeb shoved the blanket off with his stump and lurched for the door. Elias grabbed for the back of his coat, and got only wool. The door swung, cold roared in, and Jeb stumbled bareheaded into the porch light, hands outstretched toward the voice. The net fell so gently it might have been a blessing. It blossomed out of the eaves, of fine, tough mesh with barbed knots, cinching tight with a whisper strain that sounded like encouragement from a nightmare. Jeb's scream stuck to the netting. The more he fought, the more it hugged him. He toppled into the snow, a child wrapped wrong. Clayton slashed at the cords, but each cut bled more threads. Each thread tightened its sisters. The voice outside continued for a breath longer, then clicked off. A device. A memory trapped in a bellows and whistle, turned by a careful hand. Give him back, Elias cried hoarsely. He's half dead. He's a whole memory, the voice answered from the dark. I don't give those back. They worked until their knives bent. They freed nothing but a little heat from their panic. Clayton's fury ran out like blood. He dropped to his knees beside the bound men, breath fogging the night air, The old wolf suddenly old. Elias watched the hunter's shadow shift beyond the trees, a piece of midnight that moved with thought. A brittle hour later, Elias staggered into the timber alone. He made it as far as a stump bearded with ice, then folded over it and sobbed into the frozen wood. Words tumbled out between shudders, apologies to people he couldn't name anymore, fear for a mother who died believing he'd stop stealing, terror of the men he'd followed for warmth and become a dog for. "I never wanted this," he whispered into his sleeves. "I never wanted to be a knife that someone else held." A shape detached from the dark. It did not come closer than the length of a tree's shadow. Something thumped softly into the snow between them, a tin plate with jerky and a heel of bread. Elias lifted his head, astonished. "Eat," the voice said, not unkind, not kind, simply inevitable. Hunger makes boys into fools. Elias wiped his face with a rough cuff of his coat. "Why not kill me?" he asked, the question a tremor, a hope. "Because I remember being you," the voice said, "and remembering is the one mercy I haven't traded." The ring of fire spat and hissed, throwing jagged light across the snow. Sparks rose like fleeing stars, then died against the red-stained moon. Clayton stood inside that circle, coat half-burned, blood streaking his cheek, his chest heaving like a bull dragged to the last fight. His revolver hung useless, the hammer cracked, the chamber empty. Yet his eyes blazed, daring the shadows to give him the men they feared to name. "Come out," he roared, spittle freezing in his beard. "You ain't real, just a tale for drunkards. Ghosts don't breathe. Ghosts don't bleed. Show yourself." A shape emerged beyond the flames, calm, deliberate, as though the world itself had carved him from darkness. Voss stepped into the light, broad-shouldered, hair silver at the edges, his face cut with lines of war and wilderness. His coat was stitched with patches of hide, his boots scarred by years of marching where no trail existed. His eyes, yellow in the fireglow, held no madness, only memory sharpened into steel. Clayton laughed, though it cracked like glass. "So it's true. 20 years and you've been living out here, thinking you're Death himself." He wiped his mouth with his sleeve, then spread his arms wide. "Well, Death, here I am." Micah didn't answer. He stepped over the ring with a predator's grace. Clayton lunged first, fist swinging wild, catching Micah across the jaw. The hunter staggered but did not fall. He came back harder, striking Clayton's ribs with a sound like splitting wood. They collided in the snow, two wolves in the same snare. Clayton's fury was raw, desperate, his strength fueled by the knowledge that every step backward was his last. Micah's strength was colder, the patience of a man who had waited decades for such reckoning. They grappled, grunted, bled into the white. Clayton's boot found Micah's knee, bone cracked and the hunter faltered. Clayton seized the moment, wrenching the knife from Micah's belt and driving it down. The blade kissed the hunter's chest, pressing against flesh. Micah strained, but his grip slipped. For the first time, death bent near him. Then Elias cried out. The boy threw himself at Clayton's side, his shoulder striking with a thud. The knife veered, carving only cloth. Clayton snarled and backhanded him, sending him sprawling into the snow. But the strike broke his rhythm. Micah twisted, wrested the knife free, and in one smooth motion had Clayton beneath him, the edge at his throat. Clayton froze. His eyes flickered from steel to firelight, then to the shadowed figure above him. He forced a laugh through clenched teeth. "Go on then, ghost. End me." Micah's hand trembled once, then steadied. But his gaze shifted to Elias, coughing in the snow, face bloodied yet alive. "You think he's a ghost?" Elias rasped, his voice hoarse but fierce. He dragged himself to his knees, blood staining his teeth. "No, he's what God sends when ghosts want revenge." The words hung heavy, carved into the night like scripture. Even Clayton faltered, eyes darting toward the boy as if some truth had been spoken he could not choke down. Micah lowered the knife a fraction, the firelight reflecting in his weathered face. He pressed his knee harder against Clayton's chest, pinning him like prey, but he did not strike. Instead, his voice came quiet, steady as a winter stream. "Your kind stole my peace. I've taken back what I could, but I won't waste the last of me on echoes." He rose, leaving Clayton sprawled in the snow, coughing, broken but breathing. The hunter turned to Elias, who knelt with one hand pressed to his ribs. Micah reached down and pulled him to his feet. The boy swayed, but the hunter steadied him with an iron grip. "You were just a boy," Micah said, softer now, his eyes searching the younger face as though staring at his own long-lost reflection. I was once too. Elias swallowed hard, words tangled in his throat. He wanted to thank him, curse him, beg him to stay, all at once. But Micah had already released him, stepping back toward the trees where the firelight died into shadow. Snow began again, faint at first, then heavier, smothering the smoldering cabin and the trails of blood alike. Within moments, the hunter's figure dissolved into the storm, his outline consumed by branches and silence. Only the faint crunch of retreating boots proved he had ever stood there at all. Clayton cursed weakly, clawing at the snow, but his strength bled away with the night. Elias did not help him. He turned and began to limp south, each step an agony, but each step also a promise that he would walk out of this hollow. Behind him, the flames guttered, the ring of fire collapsed, and the forest sealed its mouth on everything it had swallowed. Hours later, as dawn cracked pale over the prairie, Elias stumbled into a town with frostbitten hands and eyes wide from the things he had seen. Townsfolk gathered, their whispers filling the street as they recognized the Outlaw brand on his coat. Someone asked who had saved him, who had driven back the devils that had surely hounded his heels. Elias lifted his face, lips cracked, voice low as if the woods themselves were still listening. I don't think he was saving me, he said. His gaze drifted back toward the ridge, where the trees clawed at the morning sky. I think he was warning the next devils who come looking. The saloon was warm, thick with pipe smoke and the sour-sweet scent of spilled whiskey. A fiddler played low near the corner, half the notes slurring into one another, while men hunched at tables with cards and coins that clinked like nervous teeth. At the bar sat an old man with only one boot. His other leg ended at the knee, the stump hidden beneath a wool blanket. He nursed a glass of rye he couldn't quite afford and leaned into the silence that settled when he began to speak. They called him a ghost, he said, voice rough as gravel dragged through snow. A monster, some said. A soldier gone too long in the dark. But I'll tell you plain, he wasn't no spirit. He was a man. Just a man who learned how to trap wolves. Trouble is, some wolves don't run on 4 legs. Some ride horses. A few gamblers chuckled uneasily. Others stilled, listening. The barkeep wiped the same glass 3 times over, though his eyes never left the speaker. The old man's gaze drifted far beyond the walls, back to the hollow where the pines grew too close together, where the air never quite lost its taste of ash. Wolf Hollow, he said slowly, savoring the words. That's where you'll find him. Or that's where he'll find you, if you're fool enough to wander near. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the shutters. Inside, the crowd leaned closer. He told of how the cabin had burned, the timbers collapsing in on themselves until nothing remained but charred bones of wood and the smell of pitch. Yet even without walls or roof, men swore the hollow kept its shape, like a scar on the land. Every thaw, the snow would recede and spit up bones, long, yellowed, cracked by time. No one buried them. No one dared. They were warnings more than remains. Ask any outlaw worth his salt, the old man went on, and he'll tell you. They'll ride 3 days out of their way just to keep clear of that ridge. They'll fight marshals, cheat death on the open trail, but they won't step foot in Wolf Hollow. Not anymore. He paused to sip his rye, his hand trembling slightly. The fiddler stopped, about dragging quiet over the strings. I seen what he did to the man I once rode with, the old man said. His voice cracked on the words but steadied again with the stubbornness of someone who'd carried too many regrets too long. He didn't just kill them. He judged them. One by one, he made them face what they were. Some fought. Some begged. Didn't matter. He was patient as the snow. He'd waited 20 years already. What was a night or 2 more? A young ranch hand near the bar swallowed hard. And you got away. The old man's eyes shifted down to the boot he no longer had. He let the question hang like smoke before answering. Got away? No. You don't get away from him. You just get left behind. The room went still. Somewhere in the back, a bottle clinked against the wall. He leaned closer, lowering his voice so that men had to bend forward to catch it. There was a boy with us, not much older than you. Didn't care for the life, truth be told. Never wanted to be an outlaw. And him, the hunter, he saw that. Fed him when the rest of us starved. Spared him when the rest of us burned. That boy, he walked out of the hollow alive. A listener asked quietly, what became of him? The old man's gaze softened. For a moment, the hard edge of his features gave way to something almost tender. He never carried a gun again, he said. Didn't trust steel in his hand. Took to trapping instead. Learned how to live in silence, same as the men who spared him. Every year, when winter was at its worst, he left food at the treeline. Bread, meat, sometimes a flask. He never looked to see if it was taken. Didn't have to. The crowd shifted uneasily. The fire popped in the stove, and a draft whistled beneath the door. Some say the boy grew old, settled quiet, died in his bed. Others say he's still out there, walking the ridges, waiting his turn. But I tell you this, his one good hand curled around the glass until it trembled. That man, Micah Voss, he ain't buried. He ain't gone. In the silence of those woods, you'll feel him. The air changes. The trees lean closer. And if you're foolish enough to call him, pray. The old man's voice sank to a whisper so low it silenced even the fiddler breath. Some say he still walks, waiting for the next fool who comes looking. The saloon erupted in nervous chatter, men laughing too loud, clapping each other's shoulders as if to shake the chill from their spines. But no one met the old man's eyes. And when the wind rattled the shutters again, not a single man suggested riding north.